Hey everyone, welcome back. You ready to dive in? Today we're tackling a classic John Stuart Mill and his super influential work on liberty.
Ooh, Mill. Yeah, he's a big one.
Right. It's all about, freedom, but where do you draw the line? Especially when you've got a whole society, right?
Oh,
We're going to be looking at some excerpts, by the way, to help us break it all down.
awesome. It's amazing how relevant this stuff from the 1800s still is. Like you'd think he was writing for today or something.
I know, right?
Uh,
Okay, so one of the biggest ideas Mill lays out, like the central one really, is this thing called the harm principle.
the harm principle.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it sounds simple, but it was actually pretty radical back then. It
hmm
basically says the only reason society, like the government or other people, should be able to limit your freedom is if you're going to harm someone else.
Not like harm to yourself, right? That's the key.
Exactly. Back in Mill's day, it was pretty common to have laws about what you could eat or drink.
Oh, yeah. All sorts of things we'd consider totally personal choices today.
Exactly. But Mill was like, nope, as long as you're not hurting anyone else, hands off.
Like, I think he even uses the example of like selling poison. Obviously, you can't just let anyone buy poison willy-nilly, but
But it gets tricky, right? Because if you're selling it and someone uses it to, hurt themselves,
hmm
is that on you?
it's where it gets all philosophical and interesting, but for Mill, the focus was on direct harm.
Okay, so maybe not the best example, but you get the idea. It makes you think, though, about free speech online.
Ooh, yeah.
All those debates about what platforms should allow, what's harmful versus just offensive, it all kind of goes back to this harm principle.
Big time. Mill's ideas are like the bedrock of a lot of these arguments, even if people don't realize it.
Mind blowing, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the harm principle. But Mill was also super worried about what he called the tyranny of the majority.
Ah, yes. This is huge EE.
And it's easy to forget about, right? You think democracy, majority rules, that's fair. But Mill's like, hold on, even the majority can become oppressive.
Especially if they're like really loud or powerful, or if you're in the minority opinion-wise. And it's not just about, laws being passed, it's the whole social pressure thing.
Oh, so even if there's no law against it, you feel like you can't say something because you'll be ostracized.
Exactly. Think about like, have you ever hesitated to express an opinion online because you were worried about getting attacked?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
Cancel culture, all that.
That's Mill's tyranny of the majority in action right there. It can be super subtle, but it makes people scared to be different.
Makes total sense. Which I guess is why Mill is so big on dissent. He actually says that even wrong opinions are valuable.
Yeah, that's a head scratcher at first.
Right. But his argument is when someone says something different, even if it's totally wrong, it forces you to actually think about your own beliefs.
It's like you can't just coast on, well, everyone agrees. You got to actually defend your position.
And that makes it stronger, right? He even uses the example of Socrates, who was condemned for corrupting the youth with his ideas.
And we see that all the time. Like any groundbreaking idea, at first people are like, whoa, hold on, heresy. But then sometimes those ideas change the world.
Galileo, Darwin, all those folks. So basically, Mill's saying we need these dissenting voices, even if they're sometimes wrong.
Because they keep us sharp, they make us justify our positions, and sometimes they even turn out to be right, even if it takes a while.
So it's not just about tolerating those opinions, it's about actually valuing them.
I think so, yeah. Mill saw them as essential to progress, both individually and for society as a whole. Now, does that mean anything goes? Well, that's where it gets really interesting. It's like, remember how we were talking about that tyranny of the majority thing?
Yeah, how even without laws, you can feel that pressure to conform.
Right. And Mill, he was super worried about that, like putting conformity up on a pedestal and all,
Yeah.
especially when it makes people afraid to stand out?
Yeah, it's like we're kind of taught to fit in, right? Be like everyone else.
It's tough finding that balance. I mean, Mill knew people want to fit in. It's natural. But he thought if we value conformity too much.
Then we end up with a society where nobody wants to rock the boat.
Exactly. And nobody wants to be different, experiment, really be themselves.
So how do we I don't know, get around that? Because even today, people are scared of being judged, right? Canceled, all that.
And that's where Mill's whole thing about critical thinking comes in. He wants us to constantly question things, our own assumptions, but also the stuff everyone just accepts is true.
So he's giving us permission to be skeptical.
More like it's essential. At least if we want a society that actually progresses. For Mill, it all came down to thinking for ourselves.
Not just going along with the crowd because it's easier.
Right, weighing different perspectives, maybe even realizing we're wrong sometimes. That's how we grow.
But sometimes I've noticed, like, if I bring up a different opinion,
Hmm.
people get all defensive, like I'm attacking them personally or something.
Yeah, no, that's natural. We all have our beliefs. But for Mill, those moments where you're challenged, that's where the real growth happens. It's like a muscle. Got to work it out to make it stronger.
So it's less about agreeing and more about, like, being able to have those conversations, even if they're a little tough.
Exactly. Having the guts to think for yourself, disagree respectfully, and let those weird ideas out in the open, even if they're uncomfortable, those are often the most valuable conversations, according to Mill.
Like, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. Got to shake things up.
Perfect analogy. And the thing is, Mill was all about that individual growth, curiosity, all that. But he wasn't naive. Freedom without responsibility, that's just chaos.
Right, because if everyone just did whatever they wanted, wouldn't that be anarchy?
Exactly. He wasn't advocating for that. Limits are necessary. But he wanted us to be more thoughtful about, how we control each other.
Not just, like, knee-jerk reactions and rules.
More like prioritizing individual freedom, but realizing that sometimes you got to limit it so other people aren't harmed. It's about finding that balance.
My freedom to swing my fist ends where your nose begins, right?
Classic example. It's walking a tightrope, always adjusting. And it's hard, especially these days. I mean, information overload, everything's so fast online. Yeah, Mill wouldn't even recognize this world. But his ideas, they're more important than ever. We need to be able to think critically, make informed decisions for ourselves and for society.
So, like, what do we do with all this if we really want to take Mel's stuff to heart? How do we put it into practice?
Ah, the million-dollar question. I don't think Mill would pretend he has all the answers, but I think he'd tell us to be humble, intellectually speaking.
Like admitting we don't know everything.
Yeah, and being open to learning from people who think differently than us.
Like we're all just students in this big old classroom called life.
Exactly. And good students listen, even when they disagree. They have those respectful debates instead of attacking each other.
So it's not about winning, but about actually understanding.
Taking responsibility for our own minds, basically. Read a lot, seek out different viewpoints, and constantly challenge ourselves to think harder. Because in the end, it's not just about protecting freedom. It's about using it to create a better world, more innovative, more understanding, just a richer experience for everyone.
That's actually pretty inspiring, but being real, putting all this into practice is hard. Like, we're bombarded with info, opinions, all that pressure to conform. How do we stay true to Mill's ideas amidst all that noise?
Well, that is where the rubber meets the road, isn't it?
I mean, seriously, it's like
That-
information overload out there.
Huh.
How do we even know what to pay attention to?
And that's where I think Mill would say those critical thinking skills are, like, even more important now. You're not just taking everything in, right? You're choosing what to believe, what to share.
We're all curators of our own little information museums in a way.
Exactly. You got to be picky, question everything, look for different viewpoints, and watch out for those, like, easy answers. The world's complicated, right?
There's rarely just one right answer.
Right. And usually there's a bunch of valid perspectives, even on stuff that seems simple at first, which I think brings us to another big thing for Mill: responsibility.
You talked about that a lot. Like,
Yeah.
freedom's great, but it comes with responsibility.
Yeah, you can't just do whatever you want and not think about the consequences. For him, freedom without accountability just didn't make sense.
So it's not just about me, but how our choices affect everyone else, too.
Like, even the small stuff, right, it all has a ripple effect. Mill understood that. True freedom means thinking about how our actions impact others, even if it seems like a personal choice.
So, like, I don't know, if I drive instead of taking the bus, that's my choice, but...
But it adds to traffic, pollution, all that, which affects everyone.
Right. I get it. We're all connected, even if we don't always think about it.
Yeah.
So then how do we, like, balance that? Wanting freedom, but also being responsible.
It's a lifelong thing, figuring that out. But I bet Mill would say it starts with being honest with yourself. Why are you making this choice? And then being open to criticism, being willing to change if you need to.
Not about being perfect, just trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, and learning as you go. It's a journey, not a destination. Trying to be true to yourself, Andy, realizing you're part of this bigger thing.
Man, Mill really gave us a lot to chew on with On Liberty, huh? The harm principle, the tyranny of the majority, dissent, responsibility.
And it's all still so relevant, especially today when information is everywhere and everyone has a voice online. His ideas are more important than ever, I think.
So before we wrap up, gotta ask you this. If you could design a whole society based on Mill's ideas, what one freedom would you make sure everyone had, no
Yeah.
matter what? And would you put any limits on it?
Ooh, good question. That really gets to the core of things, doesn't it? For me, it would be freedom of thought and expression. Being able to think for yourself, question things, and say what you believe without being censored. Obviously, there'd have to be limits, to prevent harm, but that's the foundation, I think, for all the other freedoms, for a truly just society. What about you?
Hmm. So many to choose from.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I'd have to go with you on that one. Freedom of thought and expression is like the basis of everything else. Learning, growing, connecting with each other, even changing the world. And like Mill said, even the wrong opinions can be valuable, right? They make
Yeah.
us think harder.
You make us uncomfortable, but that's good sometimes.
Yeah.
So, to everyone listening out there, we'll leave you with that same question. What's the one freedom you would make non-negotiable? And what limits, if any, would you put on it? Something to ponder, right? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into John Stuart Mill's On Liberty. Keep those minds open and keep talking about these big ideas. It matters.
Don't be afraid to challenge the status quo a little bit.